Good day and welcome to this edition of Plymouth Profiles. Plymouth Profiles is an opportunity to speak with people from the greater Plymouth community. And joining me today, I'm proud to welcome newly elected member of the Plymouth Select Board, Bill Keohan. Bill, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So Bill, before you became involved in government, I had the pleasure many, many years ago of working with your father when he was at DMH.
Right.
And as a young attorney, he was very kind. And so that was a good intro into your family. But tell me your background.
Well, my parents have a lot to do with it. My father worked for the Department of Mental Health, and my earliest memories of my dad was on the phone in the kitchen trying to find housing for someone who was in crisis, a family in crisis, an individual in crisis. So it was something that I grew up around. His commitment to that community was quite evident in growing up in my family. My mother was an educator. I grew up with one of 10 children, so it was a large family. So we all had to kind of pull our weight, but our parents would sit us down and give us direction. But one of the biggest directions they gave us was the importance of doing the right thing and giving back to your community in any way you could. So it was something that was a guiding principle for me when I started to go to college and study political science, and then enter the political realm in different capacities as a field organizer, and then eventually in Washington working on Capitol Hill, working for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Where did you go to college?
I went to New England College in Henniker, New Hampshire.
Nice.
I chose it because they had two campuses, one in the United States and one outside of London. And so I spent 1986 traveling around Europe. It was kind of an interesting time to travel around Europe because it was 40 years after World War II. So when you got in a cab in London or Moscow and you drove around, you would start a conversation with a 60 or 70-year-old, and they could tell you the siege of Leningrad, the Blitz of London. So it was a real lively education that I had when I took that opportunity. But when I came back, like I said, I became a field organizer and working around the country, ending up in Washington, seeing the legislative side of the equation, working for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who had a very big commitment to public service in terms of trying to see the problems in society, finding the facts and information, and making the right decisions. He was focused on preservation, and that was something that I walked away from his office and came back to Plymouth and saw that there was an opportunity for the Community Preservation Act, and that's where I kind of jumped in support of that. But I first started as a town meeting member in the late 90s, almost 27 years ago, in the old high school, in the old auditorium, and it was an education over a period of time to learn how that institution works, your role, the other town meeting members' roles, the finance committee, the select board, the warrant, the articles. It did give me great insight how the institution of Plymouth works.
So, looking back to your time in Washington working with Senator Moynihan, probably everybody should have an opportunity at some point to work with a legislator. It's a civics lesson beyond what we learn in school. But 10 years earlier, I was also in Washington volunteering in congressional offices during the Vietnam War when there was anti-war sentiment. And it was a menial job in a mailroom, but it was still interesting to be down there in working in a congressional office. So I think it's held you in good stead since then.
Yeah, it does. I have now I'm getting to a point, I've been in public service for a number of years, and younger people come up and say, how do you get involved? And I often say, you should run for a town meeting. You should get on the finance committee. These are processes. It's like Plymouth 101. You really are. It's a crash course on how Plymouth works, its potential, what we've done that has worked, what we have done that hasn't worked, where we can make improvements, and working under someone that has a lifetime experience. Obviously, you as a moderator have a great deal to offer the next generation in the people you're working with. And I often tell people that they should get involved in the process and look for those individuals that have committed a lifetime of experience, because that institutional knowledge and the conveyance of it is critical to pass the torch from one generation to the other. You really have to find the generation willing to accept the torch.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because of a lot of experience that we gained over the years. It's helpful. How many years did you serve as a town meeting member?
27 years. Okay. Late 90s, I started and served. And it was interesting when I showed up at town meeting. I walked into the high school auditorium, the same high school auditorium that I had to sit in at, study break, and so it was kind of ironic in some ways. But it was important that those are the school system that brought me up and taught me the importance of education, especially when it came to history and preservation in government and institutions. I had the honor of, Albert Thompson ran the history department, and I had teachers like Mr. Whiting and math teachers like Mr. Roy. These people taught us.
Still here.
Yeah, they're still in our community.
Mr. Roy is still a town meeting member. Got Roy, right?
So I still consult with him on certain matters, especially when they require, in finance. But these teachers that you went through the system with, they taught you the importance of what it was to be a citizen in Plymouth.
And we know many people are aware that you also were very involved in the Community Preservation Committee. Tell us about that.
Well, it stems from that experience in Washington with Senator Moynihan. He was instrumental in saving Grand Central Station, other historical, attributes in the state of New York and across the country. And by osmosis, I learned the importance of strengthening communities by strengthening these attributes in your community. And it was about historical preservation. I saw the CPA. It was unique to Plymouth, the Community Preservation Act. It allows you to set aside money for protecting open space, protecting historical landmarks, and building community housing. These are three things that Plymouth is in desperate need of. I saw this back in the year 2000, when Governor Wells signed it into law. We had to adopt it in an election here in Plymouth. And myself and others, Paul Withington and John Martini and Joan Bartlett, and a whole series of people in our community, Sam Bartlett and others, worked to get it on the ballot. We got it passed, and then I chaired it for that period of time. And my focus was on balancing the elements of the CPA with town meeting, but doing it in a way that was educational. I knew that the CPA fund could not solve all our problems, but if we used it strategically in front of town meeting and with the community, by osmosis, the residents would see that preservation works and can be economically beneficial to them. So we preserved and worked to preserve thousands of acres of land, some of the most critical historical buildings on the South Shore, and build hundreds of units of affordable housing for all demographics, from people in a crisis to working families, retiring individuals. That's the challenge when it comes to housing. There's a housing crisis. It was born out of the 1980s in an era of deregulation around government as it associated with public housing. Back in the 1980s, there was a great debate about federal spending as it came to public housing. There was a great deal of defunding of those institutions, and the funding never came back. So housing authorities struggled across the United States to build housing. I had the pleasure of working with Joan Pimentel, the housing director in Plymouth, for a few years before she retired. She had a wealth of knowledge and institutional knowledge when it came to building housing. We worked on Cherry Hill too, but she conveyed at that time that it was difficult in this modern day and age to build housing. It wasn't like when she started early in her career, where there was money coming in from the federal and state government, and they could build Cherry Hill and they could build Castle Hill in Southfield. These public housing initiatives in Plymouth were really done in the 1960s and 70s. By the 1980s, they tapered off. It wasn't until the CPA in 2005 that it picked up again with the creation of Cherry Hill 2 and the passage of the CPA. But it is a crisis that built over time. We have to start looking at other funding sources. The CPA is a part of that equation, but we should be looking at our state legislatures in our federal delegation and asking for a greater commitment to public housing, especially these institutions like Plymouth Housing Authority that was set up to build housing. And they have unique abilities to do that. And we should be investing more in institutions of public nonprofit entities building public housing to control the cost. Because if you really want to get a house cost down, you need these institutions to be reactivated from the dormant state that they're in since the 1980s. Because if you do talk to the Plymouth Housing Authority, their major focus has been getting vouchers and giving out those vouchers to people to go find housing, maintaining the properties that they have. We need to, my hope is to work with the state and federal delegation in our community to reboot these institutions that were quite successful in the 1950s and 60s and 70s building community housing. And that's the crisis we have now. We don't have enough inventory or units available. And this is one way of addressing the issue of affordable housing.
The Community Preservation Act was a natural for Plymouth because history is part of it, historical buildings, and it started here in Plymouth.
Right.
Open space. We have an open space committee.
Yep.
They work very hard. They do very well, but they need funding.
Right.
And then finally, as you've been talking about, last year, prior to the November elections, I had the opportunity to interview candidates on both sides of the aisle, and the number one issue was affordable housing.
Right.
And we hear it now at the national level when elected officials talk. They talk about affordability,
Right.
how important that is. So, thank goodness we do have the Community Preservation Act to help with some of these costs.
Yeah. I'm just old enough now to remember that era in which there was this debate about how we funded public housing. We moved away from it in the 1980s. There was a great deal of reservations about housing projects, crime and drugs. It was an event that we saw in the 1980s where we needed to move away from these constructions of these complexes. I know that later in the 80s in Boston, they were doing mixed use when it came to affordable housing, which really made places like Columbia Point in Dorchester function at a higher level. And these are the models we have to start to gravitate back to. Just because it was in the past doesn't mean that it was bad. I mean, we should look. That's what Moynihan did. He would look around the room and see that projects that were working, and he would replicate them. Move away from something that isn't successful or alter it or find something that is. So we should be reinvesting in public housing through these public institutions by advocating through our public elected officials to help control the cost of housing. It's interesting to now look back over a period of public service and have an experience in understanding the historical political connections between these events, because we are definitely in a crisis now that came out of a period in time in the past.
And how many years did you serve with the CPC?
23 years.
And of those years, how many years were you chair?
23 years. It was an enjoyable time. The work that the CPC did was really a culmination of a work with different boards of select over a period of time, different town officials over a period of time, and eventually town meeting was critical in understanding how the statute worked so they could get behind articles that in applications that were beneficial to the town. So I invested a lot of time in town meeting members and covering caucuses and going to caucuses and explaining the articles. And I wanted to do that because I wanted them to understand as much as I knew about the issue. So when some other debate came up, they could take that information and come to a better conclusion. So it was all really about education. I remember Paul Withington telling me, "What are you doing these PowerPoints for and going to all these meetings?" I'm like, I'm trying to educate people about the importance of preservation. So when they're asked a question, they will have the tools to make a good decision.
Sure. So you mentioned earlier that you did grassroots organizing, worked on campaigns.
Yep.
But then you ran for select board. How'd that come about?
Well,
because that's not working on somebody else's campaign.
No, that was...
You're the candidate.
Yeah, that was unique because in all my life, I organized on a community level. I worked for different causes and different candidates, and I enjoyed my committee work. I enjoyed the work I did behind the scenes, but I did feel like the landscape was changing, and we needed to respond to that. In my years of organizing, I always advocated for people to run for office, and I would advise them and work on campaigns. So I did hem and haw for some time about running for office. But I finally made the decision, and I'm glad I did, because I experienced something during that campaign. It was an education. I always told that to the candidates: you're going to go through this process and you'll be educated. And over a period of 47 days, I knocked on 2,700 households. And during that period of time, I had a chance to talk to residents. And it transforms you from this one mindset to another because you're hearing from the residents. And it's clear that people are looking for a different temperament and behavior. The first week I was on the Board of Select, I advocated for the reaffirmation or the revote or adoption of the guiding principles. I think that's where it starts at the top. We need to have a better dialogue. I heard it when I was knocking on doors. It was something I was committed to. I'll be committed to that process. But that just came out of a campaign. But, I worked on so many campaigns, I was worried about what this process would be like. And then I got into it, and with the campaign, I had a great campaign manager, Cara Mallon, classmate of mine, and others, Karen McCarthy and Christopher and Heidi Harding, and I had quite a few people, Joan Bartlett. I had a real nice campaign team, and we all worked to look at how we could convey information in an educational way, and we came out of it the other end. I think all changed in many ways, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the campaign process.
And you were the top vote getter. What do you attribute your success?
Well, I contributed back to my campaign. I think that they were. I surrounded myself with people who were passionate about these issues and knew how to rein me in at times, teaching me lessons about not talking too much. So I had to curtail my speeches down. But I think what we were touching was an energy in the community. Obviously, I've served on committees and boards for many years, so my name recognition was there. But we were not going to take that for granted. We were going to get out, knock on the doors, do the mailings, reach out to residents and participate in the electoral process. And we tried to do it in a different way. It was a way positive, upbeat, pointing to the possibilities of Plymouth, what we are known for and good for, and building on that. I think that the negativity and the mean-spiritedness, people were not interested. We weren't going to go negative. And you always hear that in campaign worlds, we're going to go negative. And I said, I think that only plays to one demographic. If you really want to start pulling people into this process, you're going to focus on the potential, and that's what we did. Our campaign was surrounded by an energy level that was focused on that.
And as you know, I certainly support the guiding principles, and I'm glad you pushed to reaffirm. Were there any other issues along with that you were speaking about during your campaign that brought you to the select board?
Well, yes, conservation and preservation, I think, are important in Plymouth. We're the fastest growing town in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, at times the fastest in New England. In my lifetime, where I was standing on a street corner in 1970 delivering newspapers, the population was around 17,000, 18,000. Now, in 2025, we're at nearly 70,000. So we have to make accommodations to growth and development in a manner that controls the cost of services to the town. We can do that by better zoning. I had the opportunity to serve on the Zoning Board of Appeals for many years and an alternate to the Planning Board. So I understand those bylaws that we should be promoting that control the cost of services. Really, the key to Plymouth's future is zoning. And right now, we are growing at a fantastic rate with residential and strip malls and shopping centers and congestion on our roads. This is eventually going to hurt our real estate values and also drive up the municipal cost of bringing services to the residents. So during the campaign, it was about conservation preservation, but it was about economic development through looking at our zoning bylaws and improving them for the 21st century to build a local sustainable economy, staying away from shopping centers and focusing on small businesses and light industrial parks that hire people 40 hours a week and give them a livable wage and benefits. These are things that we should be focused on as a community. We have to accommodate the growth, but we should be looking at our budget and looking at growth that won't burden the budget. So that's always going to be a focus of mine: conservation, preservation, historical preservation, land preservation, but building our local economy through zoning changes that support local businesses.
So we're taping this in July 2025, and you've been serving on the board now for over a month. Any surprises? Is it anything different than what you had expected looking from the outside in, and now you're on the inside looking out?
Yeah, so it is interesting because I worked with select board members for many years and served on committees for many years, dealt with town managers and department heads for many years. But obviously, the transition from activist committee member to the select board takes a moment to recognize that you have a different responsibility now, and that.
The buck stops with you and 4 other people.
Exactly. And the 4 other people are critical, that we all have to work together. This form of government, a town meeting form of government with a select board, the select board can function at a very high level if the board members appreciate each other and work with each other and there's a line of communication and respect. I think that's critical. And that's the one thing I'm focused on, is that there are 4 other people on this board. They have different opinions than myself. We have opinions that we agree with. We're going to have opinions that we don't agree with, but the most important thing is that we respect each other's opinions, and at the end of the day, that we come to a conclusion together as a board. I think that a higher functioning select board will mean a higher functioning Plymouth in terms of the elements in our community that we want to see grow, and that is elected officials functioning at the highest level. I mean, it's why we get behind democracy and support democracy, and why democracy is so important. We're 2 days away from beginning the celebration of 250 years of history here in our country, but over 400 years here in Plymouth, and around the elements of self-rule. If you look back at the Mayflower Compact, it makes reference to gathering into the body politic. It's the first reference that you see this in North America, and John Adams makes reference to it when writing the Massachusetts Constitution, referencing the Mayflower Compact. And we all know later on the United States government, when it came to writing a constitution, looked at Massachusetts. So the origins of our Constitution here in the United States are recognized all the way back to the Mayflower Compact. So we have a huge responsibility to support those institutions, and the only way those institutions work is we respect one another. And that's my focus on that board. It was a transformation. I'm taking my an energy level of trying to adapt to it, but I hope that those spirits will guide all of us.
So looking forward, now that you're on the board, where do you see things going with you and the Plymouth Select Board?
Well, Plymouth is going to be challenged with budgetary concerns as it comes to raising the appropriate money to function at a level that brings the services back to the residents, which it comes into fire, police, Department of Public Works, the municipality itself. Plymouth will be challenged. In my lifetime, we've always been challenged because we're growing so fast. Each budget is a challenge. Each year is a crisis. Plymouth has been managing these events as long as I can recall. But I would like to try to get ahead of the crisis and start thinking about how we can change things here in Plymouth to get greater control of our cost of services. Like I said earlier, it will be looking at our master planning process and looking at finishing that process. And as a result of coming up with a master plan for the town of Plymouth, we should be trying to look at zoning changes to make that master plan a reality, because everybody is very adamant that they'd like to see a greater conservation, preservation, and control of cost of services. So I know that that will be a focus of another focus that I will have on the board, and I think it's a challenge that the select board will have also. I think the select board has a unique position when it comes to planning the future of growth and development for the town of Plymouth. Yes, the planning board has charge of processing permits. Obviously, we want to engage them in future zoning changes, but the charter does indicate that the select board has a responsibility for the planning process. And I think that that's one of the things I think the town has to get out in front of, that the select board has to be more engaged in the future planning processes of the development of the town of Plymouth.
So you mentioned the budget and the challenges, and we have the town side and we have the school side.
Correct.
And my next guest is going to be the chair of the Plymouth School Committee. Where do you see yourself and the select board interfacing with the school side of government?
I think right now they have established a pretty strong relationship, and I hope to continue that strengthening. I think that As I went through the educational process here in Plymouth, by the time I got to high school, we were on double sessions. We were overcrowded. We were starting school at noon and going to 6 o'clock at night, and it was an overcrowded situation. So I learned a lesson. I saw a generation of Plymouthians struggle to get that education they needed to move forward because of the overcrowding. I never want to go back to that period in time, but I do know that the best way to avoid that is making sure that the school has a level of independence in that they're working with the town and the select board on their budgets. We'll be meeting with them to discuss that budgetary process. But the school system here in Plymouth has made great strides in my lifetime. Every time I drive down Aubrey Street and I glance over at that high school, I'm amazed.
It's like a college campus.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's interesting. It's placed on the athletic fields of the old high school. And I remember in 1979, we entered high school, and the freshman year, we were all upset about the overcrowding. So we planned a walkout. We were going to walk out of school and walk up on the athletic fields. And we did. At noon, everybody walked out of the high school, and we walked up onto the athletic field, somewhere around in between the women's softball field and the men's baseball field. We all gathered out on the field, and the principal came out, Mr. Singalani, and Mr. Holton, and Mrs. Henry, and they came out and yelled at us to get back into the school. And they said, get into the school, come back into the school, and we started chanting, build us a school. So every time I drive by Aubrey Street, I remember that fall afternoon in 1979 when we were standing somewhere where the lobby is of the new high school, chanting, build us a school. And there it is today, driving by it. So I never want to go back to that era where we're denying the next generation the information they need to succeed, not only here regionally, but state and nationally and internationally. We need to build an educational system that prepares kids for the future. The school system has moved and done a great job in moving in that direction. I hope to support them in that effort, and look forward to working with them.
When you're not serving in the select board or working at your job, what do you do in your spare time?
Spare time? Well, I do like history and politics, and that takes up a lot of my spare time. But I enjoy spending time with my family and friends, and enjoy all the attributes that Plymouth has. I mean, it has beautiful ponds, ocean, forest. Obviously taking advantage of that. But we live in a unique part of the country. We're only minutes away from other attributes around the South Shore. So I guess in my spare time, I like enjoying everything that southeastern Massachusetts offers.
And if somebody joined us late, what's the one takeaway you'd want people to remember about this conversation?
As a new selectman, I'm going to work as hard as I can to reach out to neighborhoods and begin a process of understanding their priorities and making their passion my passion.
Keohan, thank you for joining us. That was great. Please stay tuned for our next guest as we go to a break. This is Steve Triffletti. Thank you. I'd like to welcome you back to this presentation of Plymouth Profiles. And we're delighted at this time to have the chair of the Plymouth School Committee, Luis Pizano. Luis, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Luis, for people that may not know you, tell us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
Sure. So I've lived in Plymouth community for 15 years now. Moved here when my kids were 2 and 4, so it's really the only home my family's known. I grew up in the southwest Tucson area of Arizona. Then I came out here for school. I went to MIT up in Cambridge. So this is really where I've spent the majority of my life since I was 18. So the New England is home to me.
And once you graduated from MIT, what did you do?
I worked as an engineer for a lot of years at various companies. I've spent the last 20 plus years in the utility industry, and I currently work for Eversource as a major project director.
Okay. And so what drew you to town government?
Really it was my, specifically involved in the schools. Ever since my son was in kindergarten, I was always very involved in the schools at the local level, school council, pretty much anything I could do to volunteer and be a part of, my kids' education, I was involved in. About 5 years ago, decided, I enjoyed doing the work, but wanted to be able to serve at have wider impact across the district. So threw my head in for school committee and, was fortunate enough to get, elected. So I've been there 4.5 years now. Was vice chair for about a year and a half, and then became chair at the beginning of this year.
So as you know, I also served on the school committee, and I was the chair. And it was the same thing. My kids were young in kindergarten, and I said I wanted to get involved. In those days, we had a lot of different issues facing the town, including redistricting, because it was just so much growth. But so your kids were certainly a motivation. And so you joined the school committee. And tell us a little bit about, first of all, for people who don't know, what does the school committee do?
Sure. Well, school committee has three main responsibilities. Also, a misconception is that we are in charge of the schools and oversee things. That is really the job of the professional administrators, Dr. Campbell and his staff. Our job is to oversee, the administration, particularly Dr. Campbell. So we manage the budget at a high level. We manage essentially the superintendent, so hiring, firing, annual reviews, et cetera. And we handle policy. So, the administration comes to us with, a certain, issue, maybe a policy recommendation. It's the school committee's job to evaluate those policies and amend them and make sure we're keeping up with time. So really, it's those three key responsibilities of budget, superintendency, and policy.
So let's take them first thing, superintendency. So you've had some changes since you were there. Was Dr. Maestes?
Dr. Maestes had just retired when I was getting involved. So I've only actually ever served with Dr. Campbell. Again, I was a school council member for 10 years before that, so I'd had plenty of opportunities to present to the school committee and had, didn't know Dr. Maestes fairly well. But as a school committee member, I've only ever had Dr. Campbell.
And who supports Dr. Campbell right now as administrators?
Sure. So Dr. Campbell has several, I'll say, senior administrators. You've got Dr. Stacy Rogers, who's oversees both kind of I'll say it's special education, as well as kind of curriculum, kind of really the educational side of it. You've got Dr. Adam Blaisdell, who oversees the financial side of things, and you've got Eric Chofie, who oversees human resources. Those are really his three, I'll say, main lieutenants.
And so are they all assistant superintendents?
They're, I don't believe that Dr. Blaisdell is. He is school and business administrator. Both Mr. Chofie and Dr. Rogers' titles are assistant superintendents.
And so you mentioned the budget is another area over which you have responsibility. So what is that looking like currently for the town of Plymouth?
In the big perspective, Plymouth is doing really well, but it is by far the number one, ongoing challenge of running any school district, probably anywhere in the country. We've been fortunate that we have a very supportive town meeting members, supportive community, so we generally get what we need. We've had to make some tough decisions in the past couple of years in order to make sure that we are focusing many dollars as possible on student, education and student services, and not have to make tough decisions like last minute, layoffs. So we have made some strategic decisions to eliminate some positions so that we wouldn't have to be in a tough position and going back to town meeting and asking for more money. So thankfully, every year we've essentially gotten what we've asked for, but it's every year is a new year, so we don't take it for granted. Probably what frustrates me the most is we are fighting just to keep level service, and level service means, hey, we're keeping all the services we currently provide, we're able to continue to provide, but we're not adding programs, we're not really taking things to the next level. We do try to get creative, so it's not to say that the education you would have gotten 5 years ago is the same as today's. I think there's been clear evolution and improvements, but that's with the level service funding. So it's really trying to figure out how do we use the dollars we have more effectively.
What's the student population looking like? Is it stable? Is it decreasing, increasing?
It's fairly stable right now. What we have is that it's not homogenous. There's parts of town where it's increasing and parts of town where it's decreasing. As a whole, it's been relatively stable. If you compare it to 5-10 years ago, it has come down, but we've kind of leveled off. And if you look at the next few years, the projections are level or increasing, but very, very, very small. Unfortunately, most of the population that's in growth in Plymouth tends to be non-school age folks.
And so when you say it's not homogeneous, are you looking at any redistricting? Is it happening more down the south where the growth is?
Yeah, both. We've had a lot of growth in both on the northern side of town as well as south. So we went through a redistricting effort just a couple of years ago. I will say compared to previous redistricting efforts, it was pretty minor. It was, you look at, the borders between schools, and it was maybe shifting a line, a couple of streets and stuff. That's always a tough decision because someone has to be, inevitably some families are impacted, and nobody wants to be the one that's impacted. But you can't do redistricting without impacting someone. But it wasn't like mass scale. Thousands of people having to switch schools. I think the order of impact was somewhere on the order of a couple hundred out of 7,000 students that we have. So that should sustain us for the next several years. We try to only do it every 5 to 10 years. Probably the next thing that would probably force us to do some type of redistricting is if we are able to build a new elementary school, which would replace both Hedge and Cold Spring. If you build a new school there, we wouldn't just I think 1-for-1 shift Hedge and Cold Spring students there. You'd probably want to look at that general area and see where you can shift, and so there might be impacts to Nathaniel Morton, Federal Furnace. So it really all depends on how that northern part of town is impacted. But that would be the next major driver. Otherwise, we would try to delay anything probably all the way until as late as 2030.
So, is it likely that we're going to see a proposal for a new elementary school?
That's our goal. So right now we were fortunate enough to get approved by the state for a feasibility study, which basically means that we do all the design work, we go through all the, we proceed as if we were going to build a school, and in the end we got to see what that would cost, and then bring that to the to town meeting for funding. This feasibility period will basically take all of 2025. So if we were to proceed with ask for funding, it probably wouldn't be until sometime in 2026.
And in the past, the town received some state funding for the schools. Is that state funding still going to be available?
It is. That is part of getting through the hurdles with the state. So the MSBA, which is the Massachusetts State Building Authority, oversees any school building projects. They basically make sure that you actually have what you need. They prioritize between us and every other district in the state, and we were fortunate enough to make the cut this year going through that. But yeah, there is the rough funding is somewhere in the order of 50%. So the exact number, it varies a little bit, but it's around 50%, that the state funds.
I know that in the past, sometimes school buildings are modeled on existing school buildings in order to save. Is there any thought to that? Certainly at the elementary level, many of those buildings that were built years ago wouldn't be appropriate for models.
Correct. Yeah, that's unfortunately our newest schools are about 50 years old on the elementary side. So we have some significantly outdated schools. The teaching concepts and methodologies have changed a lot in the last 50 years. So yeah, a modern school does not look anything like it. You compare our beautiful new high schools to what we had, to what they replaced, and they're night and day. So we expect there to be similarly drastic changes in whatever the new elementary school building looks like. And yeah, because the state is involved, chances are we will be using some model that's been used, in other districts as already kind of proven. It also reduces costs as you're not doing a 1-for-1 architecture for every single individual school.
Right. It seems to make sense. So, what has been one of the biggest challenges that you think you faced as a school committee member since your initial election to the school committee?
Sure. Well, it's been a very dynamic 4.5 years. Right, I started in the middle of COVID, so I probably started with the biggest challenge I could possibly imagine. Probably the only difference between me and the other committee members is I got into that role knowing what that COVID would be, what I was dealing with on day one. Unfortunately, COVID was something that no committee member ever thought that we were making decisions no one ever thought we'd be dealing with. We were talking about whether or not to have schools open or closed, how many days students get. All the things that we take for granted that, hey, we go through school Monday through Friday from, 7 a.m. at the high schools to, 3 or 4 p.m. at the elementary. So very, it's all those givens, and we're focused on those 3 priorities I talked about earlier. So to have to make decisions that, are related to, medicine and air quality and logistics, they're really dealing with things that we were, that no one's really prepared to. There was no playbook for. So, I definitely got trial by fire those first about year and a half on this on the school committee. Since then, it's been much more typical. Obviously, budget's probably the number one challenge, and it's every year. I've gone through 2 negotiating cycles now with all of our bargaining groups. I'm was a member of the negotiating team both years. That's a challenge, but I will say we have a really great relationship with our bargaining unit. So I don't look at that experience, overly as certainly not negative, but overly challenging. It's a process you got to go through. It's mutual respect, and I think we've come out in both of those cycles with really strong contracts that benefit our employees, but are also something that we can sustain as a district.
So my daughter served as an administrator in an elementary school in Plymouth during COVID, and I think the same was true for staff. Is that
Absolutely,
like the school committee, like all of us, it was trial by fire, and I just remember the challenges that she experienced, which I'm sure you experienced. Masks, no masks, vaccines, no vaccines. I mean, everything that's playing out nationally, you are facing at the local level.
absolutely, and having to make changes, on a weekly basis based on the information we were getting. And I think one thing people forget is everyone that had to deal with anything with COVID was doing the best they could with the information they had. It was a new disease, so it's not something you can't really Monday morning quarterback it. Knowing what we know now, I'm sure things would have been handled differently, but we didn't know what we know now 5 years ago. So it's you had to deal with things with the information you had then. Always trying to keep in mind, what do we think is best for the kids, for their education, for their health. And no question, there's been some lasting side effects, and some for some kids it was, I'm sure, much more challenging time than others. But I think everyone was doing at the time what they thought was best. And hey, if another pandemic happens, I think everyone will be much more ready. But knock on wood, it never happens again.
Well, let me ask you this: either at the school committee level or the school department level, what is a lesson learned from the COVID experience that you can apply to a future pandemic crisis?
I think the vast majority of kids are best served being in the classroom. I think there were some kids. Actually, my son was probably one of them that actually thrived in the home environment. Just give me the work, put it in front of a laptop, crank it out. But I mean, most kids really need that daily connection. For a lot of kids, that's the place where they're getting their their best meals. That's the place where they have the strongest interpersonal connections. Maybe they have that's part of their support system. And a lot of families weren't set up to have kids at home all day. I mean, if you were fortunate enough to have maybe a stay-at-home parent, okay, maybe it's not as a big an impact to you. But most families, especially in Plymouth, are out there working 2 jobs, and so to have kids that are home nonstop was not something that was practical for most families. So I think I think shutting down schools should always be the last resort. I think that wasn't necessarily the mentality then, but it was right when you think back to March and April of 2025, nobody knew what to do, and it was very much a knee-jerk reaction. And as time went on, things slowly started to open up. But I think that would be the biggest thing we would do differently now is I think there'd be a much stronger push to keep schools open at all costs.
So we're taping this in July of 2025, and as we sit here at the national level, the Senate just passed a bill that is now going back to the House, and part of that bill, we're told, is going to impact the school meals that are available to students. And part of the discussion was, if you don't provide certain students with the availability of these meals, it may affect their education because they can't pay attention if all day long they're hungry. So what's going to happen at the local level if, in fact, this national, at the national level, if this bill goes through and cuts back the funding for these meals?
Yeah, so it's obviously with this just playing out in the last day or so, it's too soon to tell it say definitively. I will say I'm very thankful that we live in Massachusetts. So of any state, I think we're going to be the best off. There's a handful of other states that have fully funded.
Is that because of state support?
Because of state support, correct. This is something that the state is committed to, and so I think we'll be fairly insulated here. It doesn't mean we won't have impacts, because obviously there is federal funding that comes both to the state and to our schools. But as a percentage, it's actually relatively small. And you talk about meals specifically, that is something that is state funded. It is a state priority. The legislature and the governor have made sure year after year that we have that. And so I really don't see that going away. It was one of those things where it was there was a lot of work to get it in place. I think it would just be so politically hard for it to go away now. I don't think anyone has the appetite to try to take that away. Now the parents and schools have gotten used to it. So I think of anywhere we're going to be among the states that are least impacted, and we'll have to see how much it does impact budgets, as a whole. But I will say, I mean, we have really great state funding. We've got, strong local support here. So I think we'll be able to weather the storm, but I do feel bad for folks in a lot of other states where they're much more dependent on it.
And I know we have to be careful with rankings and surveys, but where is Massachusetts currently ranked in terms of the entire country? I mean, I think we're usually in the top 10%.
We are perennially in the top handful of schools. I mean, it's almost always a ranking you can count on one hand, anywhere between number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we are, like I said, we are as a state. It's a great place to raise a family and send your kids to public school.
Next question: what about Plymouth? How do we rank?
Well, I'd say we're middle of the road. We are much better funded than a lot of our peers across the state. And then there's, I think it's hard to compare ourselves to some of the more affluent communities, especially those like, Metro West, Boston. So I'd say, we're middle to, to above average. So definitely not, I think we have a school system you can be proud of. And if you even compare ourselves to our peers on the South Shore, I'd say, we have a very strong competitive school system.
So, Luis, you mentioned earlier that your third area of responsibility as a school committee member would be policy. Talk to us a little bit about what have been significant policies during your tenure.
Yeah, so I've seen quite a bit. Obviously, we got, there was a lot of policies related to the COVID times, but really, if you think about the last 5 years, probably the biggest challenge and biggest focus, I think, for us has been keeping up with the evolution of technology. There's been so much change in technology when it comes to cell phones, artificial intelligence, internet usage, et cetera. So trying to come up with policies that, can manage that a bit, but also not, completely, constrain our kids. Because obviously these technologies have purpose. They can have an educational role, but we also can't let kids run free. And so, for instance, like South High School actually took the lead on an individual level to do away with cell phone usage during the school day last year, and it's actually been huge. And I think we're going to start seeing that on a district-wide level. The state is actually considering doing it on a state level. Having policies in place for use of our artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can be a great educational tool, but we also don't want kids saying, "Hey, write me a 500-word essay." But if you're using it as something to analyze something you've written, or maybe use give you an idea. We grew up with thesauruses. Nobody would say, "Oh, you shouldn't use a thesaurus." Well, you could think of it as anything like, "Oh, what's a different word for X?" We used to look it up by in a book. So using technology to help you be more effective, I think is perfectly fine. And it's how do we have with policies that control that, but also allow kids and recognize the fact that we can't do anything to get rid of these technologies. We need to support them. We understand our kids are going to grow up in a world with them. So how do we make sure that the policies keep up with them? Appropriate cell phone usage. We can't have kids running around school taking pictures of teachers and then posting memes online. Things that can easily start crossing the line into bullying and harassment. So being able to control that, but also knowing that, hey, kids have lives outside of school. They have families outside of school. So we can't control everything that's going on with social media, but we have to have some boundaries in order to keep kids focused on, education while they're at school. So I think that's by far the area that we've probably had to deal with the most, and that it's going to continue all because every year the technology just keeps on changing.
As a child, I used the library a lot. And even in college, I worked at the library. And so when the internet came along, it was so different because you could just Google information.
Yeah.
And with this artificial intelligence, the kids are going to have to know how to use it, because even now at my age as a professional, I'm being asked, in some networking groups, well, why don't you prepare a commercial using, artificial intelligence? And it's like, okay, well, I got to know how to do it. So they're going to have to know, and yet you're right. They can't be writing papers for them.
Exactly. So it's finding that right balance. Yeah, I mean, every corporation out there now is figuring out how do we use this as a tool? How do we use it to make our people more efficient? So it is going to be the reality they grow up with. So we've got to face it.
I have pre-kindergarten grandchildren. In fact, my oldest grandchild is going to start South Elementary in the fall in kindergarten. And fortunately, they love books. They love to have books read to them. Every time we go out to eat, which is fairly often, they bring a pile of books and I read to them. And I'm just wondering if in early education, are we still seeing that? Are we going to see children still physically touching a book and reading a book?
We are, yeah. There's definitely no plans of doing away with our books and libraries. I think what's changed now is you look at our library facilities and the folks at staff. I mean, it's not a librarian. It's more of a media specialist because they're covering everything from the internet to old-fashioned books. So I still think there's a ton of value in kids reading reading books. If you can't read a book, it's pretty hard to read the internet. So I think we are it's melding the two and making sure that we're teaching kids technology usage, but still grounding them in some of the basics. I love growing up and still being able to open up an atlas or something like that. I think when you see little kids at the elementary levels looking at things like that, it's their minds aren't a whole lot different than ours. So I think we'll see more and more technology, but I don't see books going anywhere.
So, and while I enjoy them, reading the books to them and how much they enjoy it, they also have these little tablets or computers and the things they're doing, even the little ones and some of the games or things they play. It's clear to me that that's helpful to them going forward when they have higher level functioning on a computer.
Absolutely, that's the world they're going to grow up in. It's just and every family has to make that individual choice of what's the right age to have an iPad or have a cell phone, et cetera. So we just have to make sure that we are supporting everyone, and again acknowledging that that's the world they're going to live in.
So you mentioned earlier about maybe eventually a new elementary school coming online at some point. Any other particular goals that you have or you see for the Plymouth School Committee in the future?
Yeah, so a site, so building a school will be a big, capital, construction type effort. But and the biggest thing we've dealt with recently is just the massive increase in students with special needs, and that's a broad statement because we're talking, not just traditional special education with kids that have special learning needs, but also our large influx of English speaking students and families and folks just have just different learning styles. And I think a hallmark of the Plymouth Public Schools, and I wholeheartedly believe that every school committee member and administrator believes this, is making sure that Plymouth Public Schools is a place that every student has an opportunity to learn in. So making sure that we are an open door and making sure we are tailoring education to every student. So there is always objectives of what we expect the student to know by the time they leave Plymouth Public Schools, but making sure that every student has equal opportunities to succeed regardless of their background and learning styles, I think is huge.
Some things never change because when I served many years ago, Chapter 766 special needs was relatively new, and it was a budget buster for many school districts, and people would come to Plymouth because of the availability given the size of Plymouth.
Yeah, we are, like I said, I think between that and even going all the way down to early childhood, which includes special education, I mean, Plymouth, it is really a great place to send your kids to school.
So, Luis, when you're not serving on the school committee, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, right now, I between the school committee and my work at Eversource, I don't know that I have a lot of spare time. So I probably, when I do have that spare time, it's really relaxing with my family. Both of my kids are very active. My son is a college runner. My daughter is a very competitive dancer. So I spend a lot of time probably watching one of them do one of their respective activities. And, in the time between, it's probably just being able to sit down on the couch with a glass of wine and enjoy a TV show.
So for anybody that might have joined us late and didn't see the entire interview, what would be a takeaway that you'd want them to hear about Plymouth School Committee and your involvement in it?
Sure. One, that the Plymouth Public Schools and the committee are committed to ensuring every student, has an opportunity to succeed. Two, that every single committee member there, I believe, is there for the right reasons. It's not for personal agendas. It's not to, serve themselves or their families. It's they're really looking at the big picture of how do we help Plymouth Public Schools be as great as it can for as many, families and students as possible. Making sure that we are holding administration accountable and being good stewards of public tax dollars. But I think everyone's very committed to just making sure that Plymouth Schools are as great as they can be. Obviously, we can always use more dollars, but we'll make do with what we have and make sure that we are using the dollars we have as effectively as possible.
Luis Pizano, thank you. Chair of the Plymouth School Committee, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll have you back in the future. Thank
All right,
you.
appreciate it.
And this completes this presentation of Plymouth Profiles. Please join us for future presentations. I'd like to thank the local scene for its support, Melissa Matinzi behind the camera, and Tom Bolus and staff in the studio. Thank you for joining us. Good day.